Now, my colleague Tim Clouser has been covering the state Supreme Court races and today spoke with Tim Kovas, executive director of Full Court Press. Now, Full Court Press recruits and trains candidates up for judicial office from the Superior to the Supreme Court here across Washington state. They're chaired by former Attorney General Rob McKenna. Now, we have a record number, 5 positions on the ballot this November for the Supreme Court. This has never happened before that we've had this many. Some are recent retirements, and you have newly appointed positions that then have to run. Others just, had already planned to leave. This is a high turnover period. And some of the positions are going to be very crucial for both sides of the fight of the income tax, wherever folks come down on that. And Kovas with Full Court Press told my colleague Tim Clouser that voters who may not typically pay a heck of a lot of attention to the Supreme Court races, or maybe even read statements that are in the voter's guide about that, should probably pay attention this year because of the income tax.
We just released a judicial scorecard of the current Supreme Court, as of the end of 25. But that's, there's, for the justices on the ballot that we scored will not be on the court come future cases. So, I would encourage folks, like I said, to do the research, decide whether or not they're happy with the status quo of the courts, or if they want judges that have a different judicial philosophy, and vote according to how they want the courts to go for the next number of years.
And now, on the topic of the newly appointed Justice Colleen Melody, tapped by Governor Ferguson to fill a vacancy back in January. And he made that decision after receiving a strong recommendation from Solicitor General Noah Purcell. Nothing wrong with that, but records that we obtained at the Center Square show that Purcell, who again works in the office of Attorney General Nick Brown, discussed with state lawmakers back in December how to pass the income tax, the 9.9% tax for now, only on millionaires. And he gave some advice to crafters of the income tax on how to make sure that it would be referendum proof, sort of skirting a vote of the people if at all possible. Of course, that's not likely to happen now. We're in the middle of an initiative effort, folks with Let's Go Washington, that hope to put a repeal initiative before voters this November. So that might happen by initiative, but that's harder than doing it via referendum. So the goal here from Noah Purcell was, let's try to avoid having a referendum. Now, Colvis at Full Court Press said, though, that might appear to be a conflict of interest because you've got Noah Purcell and others in the AG's office giving financial contributions to the campaign of Colleen Melody. It's not against the law to do that, and they worked with her before. They knew her. So he said, regardless of whether or not you see a conflict of interest there or think this looks a little, iffy that this is going on, he said that really shouldn't matter. What should matter, according to Tim Kovas at Full Court Press, is that this should show you that the governor's office does have a lot of power. The AG's office does have a lot of power in determining who candidates are, at least, and appointees for certain are to the state Supreme Court. And again, he says that is all the more reason voters need to pay attention to the races this November.
That there is a true question that when you've been an employee, you are hired by the governor appoints you to the highest court, and then in your first election, those folks are all backing you and financially supporting you. One can make the conclusion that they feel that she will be very supportive of their arguments when they're in court, to defend policies that they have fought for, or strike down policies they're against. And we've seen with the current makeup or the uh, before the two appointments, the prior court was a rubber stamp for the majority party in Olympia, and this current dynamic seems to strengthen that perspective.
Now, according to the state's Public Disclosure Commission website, staff in the office of AG Nick Brown have donated thousands of dollars to Colleen Melody's campaign for this year, including a $500 donation directly from Noah Purcell. Now, Washington GOP Chairman Jim Walsh told the Center Square that, like it or not, it's not a surprise to him, given that Melody worked with, Noah Purcell and worked with Governor Ferguson in that office. It's not a big surprise. You might take that for what you will, whether you think that's a conflict or not. But again, according to the folks at Full Court Press, it's just all the more reason that voters should care about the races and have an opportunity to get educated before the vote this fall. Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Wednesday, June 17th of 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square, Washington's state government reporter. Okay, let's start out. You and I are in the wrong business, or at least I am for sure, at least if we wanted to get rich. If you happen to be one of the state employees working at the University of Washington, or maybe at the Department of Corrections as a nurse, you're doing pretty well in many cases. We have about 154 to 156,000, I've seen some different numbers today, state employees that you, the taxpayer, pay their salary, working in state government and for various agencies. Just go back a few years ago to 2023, and there were less than 126,000 state employees. So that means we have 30,000 more state taxpayer funded employees than we had just 3 years ago. That's a pretty remarkable increase and growth in state government. And we wonder why we're always in a deficit, right? Over 50% of all state employees' salaries go to higher education. The University of Washington alone, get this, they account for 41% of all state salaries. That is a huge percentage. And the highest paid UW employee is the head football coach. Not really a big surprise, right? He was paid $5.9 million last year. Actually took a pay cut from the year before. That was kind of interesting. The head basketball coach at the University of Washington was paid $3.2 million last year. But there's even a professor on the campus who made more than $1 million last year. Now, Department of Corrections employees, you can see here, including nurses, check this out. Some of them made more than $400,000 last year. Now, of course, being a nurse at the Department of Corrections, working with inmates, that's a dangerous job, potentially justified salary, and some of that is likely coming from overtime pay. But there are a bunch of psychiatrists at corrections making well over $300,000. So in all, you've got state employee compensation generally accounting for between about 23 and 30% of the entire state budget. That's pretty remarkable. I knew it was a good chunk of the budget. I didn't know it was up to 30% of the entire budget is going to pay for state employees. Now, Ryan Frost is Washington Policy Center's Tax and Budget Policy Center director. He told me this morning that in 2025, the state budget grew by nearly $2 billion just to cover the raises that state employees got. Let me say that again. The budget went up in 2025 by nearly $2 billion just to cover the raises that state employees got. So that's just the hikes.
Anybody who looked at the budget that passed in 2025, they saw that the biggest line item increase was state employee salary. And there were a lot of cuts to make up, to be able to fund that $2 billion, which is about what it was, just shy of $2 billion, just in net increases. So not the step increases that were already kind of built into a lot of the employee salaries. That was just like net new spending for the bargaining agreements. Um, they cut Medicaid, they cut the Department of Children, Youth, and Family. There's a lot of cuts they made to fund those. And so I think from the outside perspective, it's the problem is that when we're running multi-billion-dollar deficits, if a private company has no money, they don't then pass out $2 billion in employee raises. Only the state manages to do that. And this has been kind of an ongoing problem in Washington for a long time, is that we have zero seat at the table when those negotiations are being made. Every collective bargaining agreement made by the public employees are done with their unions and with the director of OFM, who's appointed by the governor. There's no taxpayer advocate at all. The legislators get this bargaining agreement in front of them, and it's either yes or no. They can't amend it. They can't do anything. So until, frankly, there's a seat at the table from the taxpayer perspective, and sorry, I don't believe that there is one now. I don't believe the governors and his representatives at the table have the taxpayers' best interests in mind. Then these types of things are just going to keep happening over and over again.
So again, the issue here for many is transparency or lack thereof. Governor Bob Ferguson's Office of Financial Management Director goes in behind closed doors, and I'm sure some of her staff as well, and they sit with union leadership, Washington State Federation for State Employees, and other union leaders. And I don't know how it works. If the union guys go in and say, "This is what we want, this is what we demand," and then OFM responds on behalf of the governor and says, "Yeah, that's too much. We can't really afford it this year. We're in another budget deficit, as I'm sure you're aware." How that negotiation goes, we don't know. We don't even have an opportunity to find out, even through public records requests. So it's all done in secret.
There's not a state that's more secretive than Washington's in the fact that we have zero light. We can't shine a single light into how that negotiation goes. You can't even like PDR those negotiations to see what the process was, what the starting point was, what the negotiation ended up being. Was there actually even a negotiation, or did they just give what they wanted? I'm sure there are other states. I'm sure there's some other large states. I don't know how California does theirs, but I imagine it's much different than ours. But there's not a way to keep it hidden from the taxpayers more than the way that we do it.
Now, Frost and WPC told me that since 2022, just 4 years ago, compensation for state employees has gone up about 30%. That's in just 4 years. That is remarkable. You didn't get that at your job, I'm guessing. Probably not. Not even a cost of living raise, maybe. We all should have been government employees. The other significant conflict here is that these union groups are the ones that give large campaign donations to the governor and Democratic leadership and their campaigns. It certainly could present the appearance, at least, of a conflict of interest. Again, we don't get to find out what goes on behind those closed doors in collective bargaining for state workers, but it's your money on the line. And as you heard Ryan Frost at WPC say, other states don't do it like this. Why we have a complete and total lack of transparency here? Maybe it's something that lawmakers should consider.
Here with me today is Patrick De Haan with GasBuddy, here to talk about the new deal from the Trump administration that could potentially end the war in Iran that has caused gas prices to go up across the country. Here in Washington State, the average price is right around $5.50 a gallon, while much of that is attributed to state and local taxes. Patrick De Haan, big picture, what does this tentative deal mean for the potential reopening of the strait and gas prices here in Washington State?
Well, in Washington and much of the country, it's very much a do or die situation. We're starting to see some rather ominous figures. The SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, has declined to its lowest level since 1983. The delivery point for crude oil in the United States, the inventories have declined to their lowest level since 2014. Oil inventories in OECD countries has fallen to their lowest level since 1990. So this is very much a do or die situation to reopen the strait. If it does happen, it will mean potentially lower gasoline prices over the duration of the coming months rather quickly. We've already seen gas prices in Washington falling 23 cents in the last month on the hopes that a deal could happen. If this deal does move forward, it could mean more falling prices. But if it doesn't happen, which is a distinct possibility, it could mean gasoline prices eventually slingshot up even more significantly than they did in the last few months. So very much an extreme amount of uncertainty over what's going to happen. But if the deal does happen and the strait does reopen and it's verifiable, it certainly would usher in lower gasoline and diesel prices for much of the rest of the year.
Can you kind of briefly explain where this deal is at right now? I know a lot of people might not know all the political jargon and context that goes around it, but for consumers at the pump, is this a concrete thing? Is it more of tell me where it's at?
Well, we've been back and forth. The president surfaced the idea of a deal. He announced the deal on Sunday, but we've seen in the past few months these deals may unravel. Ceasefires may be violated. There are other elements that have continued this war for now 107 days, or the strait has been closed for 107 days. That's where things stand now. There's probably a lot of pressure the administration is under to get the strait reopened. Iran has certainly been leveraging that negotiation tactic by keeping the strait closed. And in the backdrop of this, global oil supplies have been dropping as a result. Now, oil markets have been anticipating that a deal would be imminent here for the last couple of weeks, and that's what has pushed oil down. Is the possibility has gone up of a deal. The president's been teasing it for weeks, but there's still the possibility that something could happen late in this that could unravel a potential deal. So gas prices have been hanging on a thread to any developments, whether good or bad, and that is holding true now more than ever. Global oil inventories aren't looking very good. And if a deal doesn't happen, we're suddenly going to be greeted with the reality that global oil supplies are in a very precarious position.
If the deal does hold, how quickly could Washington state consumers see some relief at the pump? And at the same time, what would that price look like compared to the national average, assuming both fall with a deal going through?
Well, we've already seen oil prices declining even with the strait remaining closed based on this deal happening, and that's already impacting gas prices and pulling them down. So if the deal finally, gets through, it's just going to solidify more continued decreases that have already started. If the deal doesn't happen, it probably will mean the opposite. And it could mean a continued decline for as long as oil prices go down. But we don't have a whole lot of clarity on exactly what will happen. So it's impossible to know if this is going to pave the way for lower prices for the rest of the year, or whether there's going to be new turns and twists in the road down the road.
So right now there's about a $1.45 gap between the national average and the Washington state average. For Washington drivers, how much of that price is really tied to the global market versus state-specific costs like state taxes, the cap and trade climate program, and stuff like that?
Well, price in Washington about $1.10 a gallon more than they were a year ago. Beyond that, most of that is probably attributed. The difference that is beyond that $1.10 is attributed to Washington's programs like cap and invest, gasoline taxes. Washington now only trails California, which has even more environmental programs. So, much of the reason why Washington, 5.49 a gallon today. Much of the reason why prices are over $5 have to do with Washington's higher gas taxes, its cap and invest program. But some of the higher costs is also attributed to states like California, which have essentially overregulated and pushed refineries to leave the state. And that is something that's impacted really the entirety of the West Coast. So you really can't underscore that Washington, a significant reason for Washington's elevated gas prices have to do with state-specific taxes and state-specific programs like Cap and Invest.
Uh, in the next 2 or so weeks, the state gas tax itself is set to increase by 2%, and it's going to continue in the years ahead. Doesn't seem like a major jump, but in terms of the state already having high gas prices compared to the rest of the country, how noticeable are little hikes like that to the average consumer?
Well, in and of themselves, they're not very noticeable. But over time, the total impact that these taxes have grows more and more significantly. Washington is already, as you mentioned, at a significant premium to the national average. Increases in gas taxes will further elevate the gap between the national average and Washington state in years ahead. So while the 2 cents may not be felt, the fact that Washington's average is $1.50 a gallon above the national average and growing is going to be a point of contention that continues in the years ahead.
Now, I'm looking at the map behind you. It clearly shows Washington State bright red there with Oregon and California. If pressure does ease in the U.S.-Iranian conflict, um, will the state likely remain among the most expensive in the nation in terms of gas and diesel prices?
Yeah, without a doubt, the map behind me is not necessarily a single day snapshot. It's a snapshot of where things generally lie. The West Coast almost always the most expensive because of refining challenges, because California's unique environmental regulations have kind of forced refineries out of the state, or they've made it counterproductive to operate in the state. And then you have the West. Many states have elevated environmental standards. There is a cost to that, as well as high gasoline taxes. So, the map behind me may be a moment in time, but generally the proportions, when you look at states in the Gulf and states in the West Coast, generally those proportions hold up over time. And it's the exact opposite reasons that areas of the Gulf tend to be cheaper. It's low taxes, it's proximity to infrastructure that drives prices lower in Gulf states.
And to close, what should consumers be looking for in the next few weeks? Is it crude prices, the tanker traffic, refinery capacity? What will give them a sign that prices are likely to fall in the weeks or months ahead?
It's all about the situation between the U.S. and Iran. Will the strait open? Will it open significantly? Oil prices will tell that story for you. So if you just watch the price of oil, that should be enough to know where we're headed.